What's up, disruptors and curious minds? Welcome to another episode of Thinking on Paper. My name is Jeremy Gilbertson. I guess thinker, disruptor, strategist, interdisciplinary nerd, and my friend on the other side here, Mr. Mark Fielding,
Hello.
snowboarder, writer, looker of satellites, all the great things. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And yeah, and as you said, continual holiday maker as well, because I'm once again on the road. But I promise this is the last time. And yeah, I've had a great week. I'm in the south of France, but before we came live, I was just telling Jeremy that I saw Starlink deploy satellites a few nights ago. So we were out looking at the sky, and suddenly this eerie blue, almost greeny blue light appeared across the sky and went from right to left across, and it was beautiful but intriguingly bizarre.
So even in real life, experiences can have their glitch moments then, I guess.
Well, yeah, it was kind of the cutting edge of emerging tech. Maybe how do we get Elon on here, Jeremy?
Baby steps, baby steps.
Well, challenge him to a cage fight.
I'm in. I'm down. I've been training, man. I've been training. So, hey, we have a super exciting announcement today. I'm not sure if you guys saw a bunch of these teasers and announcements as of late, but Mark and I started this experiment. I don't even know how many months ago, and based off of 2 Zoom calls that I had with some random guy in the south of France, or in the Swiss or French Alps rather. We turned it into discussions where we get to talk to some of the most amazing creative technology people around, and I'm super thankful to be able to do that. We actually have our first sponsor, Mark, believe it or not. This is big, guys. Like, we're really, really excited. So we wanted to be really careful about sponsorship too, made sure there's alignment. And actually, I was doing some work with these guys before we even talked about sponsorship, which is even cooler. So it was a pretty organic situation. But we would like to welcome Ripple with a W. Ripple with a W as our first sponsor to this show, Thinking on Paper. Want to really thank Dixie Gilbert, Ray Samuels, and the whole Ripple team for supporting this mission of exploratory creativity and curiosity. So a little bit about Ripple. These guys are great. They're actually marketing's on-demand talent platform. So it's a place where vetted freelancers can connect with employers and companies looking for freelance talent. And there's a stat that Dixie shared with me the other day that I guess by 2027, more than 50% of the workforce is projected to be freelance. I mean, that's pretty groundbreaking, right?
What was that stat? How many?
Over 50%.
I think that it is pretty impressive. It's a very impressive statistic, but as we are both freelancers, there's a lot to be said for it. And I think that having Ripple as a place to, find work, find jobs, find agencies to kind of show off your skills is an awesome thing to have. And I'm very happy that they've decided we're worthy of them. So cool.
Totally agree. Yeah. Thanks, guys. And just a quick note, and then we'll bring on our guest that we're really excited about today. But Ripple is trusted by brands like Delta, Equifax, AT&T on the brand side, and then big agencies like Wunderman Thompson, Fitzco, 22 Squared. I think there are 3,200 plus vetted freelancers on this program, which include me, PS, if you're looking for a curious mind or disruptor, FYI.
And soon to be me as well, if you're looking for a writer.
That's right. Well, welcome, WRIPPLE.com. Mark will post it in the links, but thanks for joining us, guys, today. We have a very exciting guest to talk about, again, this intersection of physical and digital experiences. What makes an experience so meaningful from a human perspective, and then how technology has been coming along and applied to drive new experiences. Mark, how did you run across Josh?
Well, Josh is another recommendation from the Thinking on Paper community. So I did a call to arms the other day asking for interesting, incredible people at the forefront of culture and technology. And Josh was recommended by numerous people. So I reached out, checked out some of his work, and thankfully he agreed to wake up early because he's on the West Coast and come and talk to us. And I'm very interested about today's discussion because personally, I used to live in Paris, Jeremy, a stone's throw from one of my favorite museums in the world, at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. And now I live far from the city and I have kids and I want to take them to museums, but it's difficult. And one of the promises of emerging tech, of AR and augmented reality and the metaverse and increasingly spatial computing and these other techs is the breakdown of geography, isn't it? It's like removing the barriers of geography. And I'm very interested to see how Josh is approaching that with his company Blue Cadet. So let's get him on.
I guess without further ado, let's bring the mystery guest out. That's not so much of a mystery anymore. Josh, welcome, sir. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Amazing, amazing. Well, hey, let's get started right in. Why don't you give us a quick rundown, kind of your background and how it translates to Blue Cadet, and how it also translates to this other project, Art World, that seems super, super interesting to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So basically, I started my career in-house at the Smithsonian American Art Museum about 20 years ago. I was a new media specialist, which meant I was basically a Flash developer, designer, and so I did that for a little bit inside the belly of the beast. I started Blue Cadet as my freelance handle about 17 years ago. Then I moved it up from DC to Philadelphia, where I made it like an actual agency, and we grew very linearly. There's about 45 of us right now. We were a bit larger pre-COVID, but now we're like a pretty tight, lean team with offices based in Philadelphia and New York. And really what we do is we work with a lot of big cultural institutions, thinking about how technology manifests both in physical environments, but also as digital products. So for example, we just did a project with the MIT Museum, actually a brand new museum, where we did 20 different interactive experiences throughout this sort of new campus. We're working right now on the redesign of the Library of Congress, the Folger Shakespeare Library. We're opening a new immersive experience at the Met. And then we've also done like these sort of like large web platforms as well. So we did like the National Air and Space Museum's website, or the National World War II Museum's website, the Natural History Museum of LA's website. We're working right now on a huge project for the National Gallery of Art in DC. And then there's the physical and the digital, and then there's the combination of that. So we've done some really interesting stuff in AR and XR. So that stuff's really fun. The thing is, like, if you're running an agency, you end up becoming less and less deeply in the work, and a little bit removed from some of the day-to-day client work. So about 2 years ago, I started a project called Art World. It's like Art World without the O in the end, ARTWRLD.com. And it kind of brings me back to my roots, where we're working with very, very sort of established artists, artists that might have a solo show at the Whitney, or, that might be showing at, the MoMA. And we are basically pairing them with digital innovation, digital production, to create bespoke digital projects that we're then tokenizing as NFTs. And we've sold out our last 4 drops. We had a piece acquired by the Pompidou. We have another project coming out in September that we'll be announcing soon with Marco Brambilla. So that's all. It's all kind of all the same stuff. It's art, tech, physical space, culture.
How did that relationship or deal with the Pompidou come about? I know that France has a big NFT and art community. So the Pompidou are exploring the space as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's interesting because, I think most art curators get like where NFTs fit into the overall arch of art history. It's like to them, they're very used to sort of spotting these trends, and like they can sort of discern that, like, okay, NFTs are an actual thing. Like there is like even just as a technology to sort of like tokenize digital content, it's a thing, and they want to get involved in it, but they want to get involved in it in a way that feels like consistent with how they collect and how they curate. So the artist that we ended up that they acquired was Jill Magid. She did this amazing project called Outgame Flowers, which was actually a ready-made, where she basically went into all these different video games and like extracted the source code of like flowers. So like Mario flowers, Zelda, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, and she created these like really crazy, beautiful bouquets. But like Jill is like, she's taught at Cooper Union forever. She's had shows at the Whitney and MoMA. Like she's in like all the major collections. So for the Pompidou to acquire a Jill Maggot is like a pretty easy thing to do, honestly. It's like a very safe thing to acquire, her work, because she does have such a track record. She's also done some amazing films. So for them it's safe, and also it's just a beautiful, interesting, cool project.
I wasn't expecting to just follow. Sorry, Jamie, to talk so quickly about NFTs, but also
Sure.
As somebody who's like on the front line of this, I'm interested in how the thought of the artist has changed. Let's say in the last year, of how to use NFTs, how to create NFTs. What's different now in like August 2023 compared to early 2022 or 2021? What's changed in their headspace?
Well, it's for us, when we entered into the space, it was always a little bit of a hedge against what was happening in the space, where there was all these kind of, there's a lot of these PFP projects. There were a lot of these teams that were sort of promising utility and community and, building these really amazing they were making really amazing promises. A lot of them were very like, I don't want to say this is disparaging, because I think there's actually there's some amazing people in that space. But I think a lot of them didn't have a lot of experience, honestly, like running running complex digital projects, or working with artists of a certain caliber, who have certain requirements. There was a lot there where there was a lot of noise, and there were some like really interesting projects sort of like mixed in there. For us, we were like, okay, we're really looking at this on sort of like a longer time frame, and we're like, look, at some point there's going to be a crash, and at that point, the tide will pull away, and the people that are actually like equipped to weather the winter and to like do something with some longevity, they're going to stick around, and everyone else is going to scatter, and that's sort of like honestly a bit of what's happened. And for us, like we look at it and we're like, look, there's some amazing things in the affordances of Web3, to create a much closer relationship between the creator and the consumer, and to create like bonds of community that just were not possible before. I've worked for my entire career with all these sort of like amazing gatekeepers like the Smithsonian or Christie's. They're a lot of them are very well intentioned, but they are gatekeepers. And I think there's something really interesting about Web3, about being able to like create a more direct connection between the artist and their fan, and create a financial connection. I think the idea of royalties is profound, and is profoundly needed in the art world. I think OpenSea kind of running away from that is a bit of a mistake. I think we're going to see other marketplaces open up that do enforce royalties. I mean, and also like to me, it kind of reminds me of the early days of Flash, where it's just like there's a technology where like no one's totally unpacked all the things that it can do, and like all the amazing art that it can create, and like all the cool things you can do to make art interactive and responsive and dynamic and timely, and and really easily transactable and compostable. There's all these like cool things that we haven't got into. I'm giving you really long sentences. I will truncate my next response.
Hey, the more we hear you talk and the less we hear us talk, the better.
Okay.
Exactly.
Just like
I think our audience would agree on that one.
No truncation.
Fair.
No, one thing that I was thinking about, something you mentioned in your first part of that response, Josh, was the idea of applying this tech in a way that doesn't distract from the innate human experience of all of this stuff, right? So how in your work with what you're doing with Art World, but also Blue Cadet with these museums and that sort of thing, how do you balance and make sure tech doesn't get in the way of the reason why you're building what you're building?
Oh, totally. I mean, I would say that like, I come from an art background. Like I'm like a competent drawer, and I'm a designer with like a very sort of like fetishistic eye towards aesthetics. My wife is a designer. But like, I also I'm like, aesthetics are not the thing that make me really excited. Things that are like just beautiful or just like all inspiring, like often feel like a little shallow to me. And the thing that I've always like kind of like loved about museums and just like the cultural space in general is that there's usually a lot of depth to it. There's like, and like, if something is in a museum, there's usually a reason it's there. And like, usually there's like a story and there's a story within the story. And then there's something there that's actually, kind of worth digging into. Cause like, if you look, people will like, if you're looking at like a Jackson Pollock, and it's just a bunch of like paints all over the place, like, who gives a shit? It's like as aesthetically, sure, it's beautiful, but like what's interesting, but like that's not enough. Like what's interesting is like where it sits in history, like why it was happening at that time, like why, what it meant for someone like that to do something that was like dynamic and physical. Like why coming out of World War II, people really wanted to get away from representation, and from the aesthetics of Hitler, frankly, and the academy, like those things are all super interesting. So like when I'm thinking, so like when I approach it like with a Blue Cadet or even Art World, like I'm really drawn to stuff that has that depth, and inviting people into the depth. And in terms of like technology, it's just a tool. Like, I don't give a like to me, it's like, I just want to use it to drive the story and and drive people, like give them agency to discover things that are really interesting and to find some of these things for themselves, and also to empower them to be able to like look and explore and dig deeper. Like that's the stuff I want to do. And I'll use any tool, old tech, new tech to do that.
Tell me about an experience when you've run across a museum or a brand or a project where, basically I love the tech is in service of the story always.
Yeah.
Songs, just a microphone needs a great song and a great melody. It's just a microphone, right?
Right.
But tell me about an instance where a museum or a client of Blue Cadets has come with the expectation of, Josh, I have to use this tech. I got to use AI to do this. I want to build a VR experience. Like, how do you navigate that to say, hey, let's find the story first and take it through?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. I mean, it's, when you run an agency, like a lot of work comes to you via RFP. So it's like, you get this request for proposals. It's like, they've gone off into their corner and they've come up with like, this is what we want. This is what it's going to be. Or like somebody on the board of directors comes to them and is like, I discovered AR this weekend. We're going to do AR, and like, like, we got to do it like this. And and sometimes they're great ideas, and sometimes you're like, okay, like we have a process for bringing those into the studio and refining them and making them work. And like, they always like will, move a little bit, change and iterate, as you develop them. And then sometimes you look at an idea and you're like, oh, this is just like not a good idea. For a long time, I was just like killing native app ideas because like everybody wanted a native app, and I'm like, dude, unless you have like a really rigorous onboarding process, or you're just like willing to feed this beast with like new content, and marketing dollars, like just don't do it. So what we started doing is we do a lot of these things with ideation sprints, where someone will come to us with an RFP, and it could be like $1 million project. And we'll like, dude, cut out 40K and let's like work on this for a month and actually figure out what you guys should be doing. And like sometimes we'll even build prototypes within that space. And in the prototypes, we're very into prototypes of Blue Cadet. Like a lot of our LinkedIn stuff is like, and a lot of stuff we share in social is just like prototypes and stuff that we're playing with. And that's like just a really good space to like either like allow a great idea to shine or just like to kill a bad idea before it like, gets forced into the world.
Is
Yep.
a 3D is a 3D display better than the real thing? I mean, how do you when a museum comes to you with an idea and the story is tech, not the other way around, there has to be some kind of sacrifice for tech because the real thing can be more of an experience without the tech sometimes. So how do you juggle that trade-off?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, because we work with a lot of different types of museums. And we also work with like brands. We worked with like Amazon and Google and all those guys too. Often when we're doing that, we're doing very sort of Blue Cadet-y type projects where it's like getting into the story of their tech and all those things. So, I mean, sometimes when I talk about this, it ends up becoming about art. And I think art is like one of those things where like you don't want the tech to get in the way. Like you really want the tech to sort of set the stage and create a framework for engaging directly with the piece. I think that's also any sort of museum that's more artifact driven. I think that's really important. But I think what's also really interesting to think about though is, a lot of times people come to these places with like not a lot of context. Like they don't know the stories. Like they have, like the stage hasn't been set. And I think a lot of times if you're like a curator and you've been living with this stuff, or some sort of subject matter expert, you're like, well, why wouldn't you just want to encounter this thing, without any context, or just like a little wall label? Like that's enough, because like you're coming at it with all these things. And like I just don't think that's often true. And a lot of times, it's really incumbent on the institution to really set that context, and they can set that context by doing a much better job, telling those stories online and in their different channels, or they can set that context in the space. So like an example, we actually did a Van Gogh projection room for the Art Institute of Chicago in like 2007 or something like that. It was no, 13, somewhere around there. But the thing is, it was all about Van Gogh's bedroom at Arles. So it was for the first time they were bringing 3 of those different paintings together, in like one place. So you could see the 3 bedroom paintings together. And like, I mean, like they're beautiful paintings, but like what's interesting about the bedroom at Arles is that was actually basically what happened was like Van Gogh visited Arles. He was rooming with Gauguin. He's a terrible roommate because he's extremely mentally ill. Like Gauguin and him, like he has this like really
what a flat share that is.
Oh, terrible. Like, but like he's manic, so he gets there and he's like a super insane diarist. So he's just writing everything out. He's writing these letters to his brother Theo. So you have all of this, you have his words and his thoughts, and you can see how manic he is when he first gets there. And he's like, I'm saved. This is wonderful. This is great. And then you can watch him crash. And then he gets institutionalized and then he kills himself. And cuts his ear off in the interim. But like the thing is, like, if you're just to like go to the museum and those paintings are there and that's described in a wall label, it's just like not enough. So like what we actually used that projection room for is like it had like an original score. It had it was like projecting his words. It had like a voice. So like what it was doing, it was really trying to tell the story, set the setting, so that when you saw those things, you had more of an emotional leveling, and then we also had another bunch of screens where you could explore the technical aspects of those paintings as well. But a lot of what we're doing is just like setting the stage so people can like can feel like they have some access, because otherwise people would like show up and they feel like they're idiots, and they feel like they're ignorant, and like it's just not an enjoyable experience, so they opt out.
Yeah, that's story. So super interesting on this.
Great book.
Yeah, shout out from Anthony. Yeah, thanks for Lust for Life. That would be.
But look it up though. Benedict Cumberbatch did a BBC thing on Van Gogh. It's actually free on Vimeo. Look it up. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And what I did was I was like, we were watching that video, we were watching that movie, and we're like, this is what we're trying to feel. Like we were trying to evoke an emotion. We wanted people to feel that way. And like a lot of times you go to museums and like they don't really help set the feeling. Well,
I think a couple of quick points on that. You honed in on this earlier. Like museums can be intimidating for people who want to experience art, but they don't necessarily know a lot about it. So they go in there and they're like, God, what do I do? What does this mean? What am I supposed to feel like? But having connection to the story behind it is powerful. I'm going to give a little analogy. Like you have to tell the story a lot of times for people to get it, right? So Sherwood Schwartz, right? The Gilligan's Island guy, right? That had the song. The song basically told the whole story. And originally, I think the network execs were like, "Oh, we already know what this is all about. We can't. No, you got to tell them. You got to tell them, and then you got to tell them again and again and again.
Yeah.
And then the connection is established. I guess. What do you do? You find that driving you as far as like trying to make museums less intimidating, more accessible by connecting them to the story?
Yeah, the other thing is like there's a lot of different ways to like get people to engage. I mean, honestly, like a lot of times when people come to me, like what museums come to me, And they're just like, well, what is the technology I should be using to like tell stories and create engagement in this space? And I'm like, look, the best technology that we have as humans is other humans. Like, I was like, train your docents, make that, make sure like those people that are in the room that are like, that can tell a good story, like train them to be able to approach people, to be able to have conversations, to be able to do that. Cause like they are a very facile technology. AI is catching up, but it's not there yet. So like humans are a great technology. And then it's like, also, you just have to think about like, what are all the other modes? The other thing I would say too is, people like, I also try to make it so this is not always like passive. So, when we were doing the MIT museum, we were trying to like teach about AI. And one of the things that we did was this was before ChatGPT came out. We were actually working with OpenAI on ChatGPT 2. For this experience, but we were like, okay, well, how do you get people to understand how AI works? And we're like, well, you could tell them, you could have all these videos or reading or explainers, or you could have them participate. So we actually created this experience called collaborative poetry, where you would write a line of poetry, the AI would write a line, and it would go back and forth. And then you were having this sort of like creative expression with the AI, and you would play with it and you'd iterate it and you'd kind of test it. And like that sort of giving the user agency ended up making sure that, that makes them learn a lot more than like if you're just like punching, like signaling facts at them.
Did you make a book out of that, or my question on that, because I saw the video and it looks really cool, the whole experience. I'm not sure how long it took to put that together. It looked like probably a long time. But yeah, can AI write poetry?
Oh yeah. Shout out to there's a few really fantastic like AI poets actually operating in the NFT space. Sasha Stiles, Anna Caballero are two that come top of mind. But definitely like look them up. And like I think that the other thing that's really, I mean, one, like it can totally do it. Like anything, it needs to be trained, and it needs to be prompted in a really in the right way. But like also the thing is like you'll end up having a very, very like the collaborative poetry experience was incredibly intimate. And actually some people like had very sort of like emotional reactions to it because like they started writing things that were personal and the AI started writing things back that felt personal. And like, in some ways they were interacting with this thing in a way that they would have probably had a very hard time interacting with like their peers, their family or other things. So like, I think there's like crazy affordances for AI to provide a very safe space for human creativity and expression that sometimes we have a hard time creating for each other.
Yeah, another plus up for the. Yeah, sorry to jump on you, Mark. Another plus up in the chat from another Anthony. We've got a slew of Anthonys today in the chat. What's up, guys? Thanks for jumping in. Yeah, just a plus up on the idea that interactivity, right, is big, and making the experience make the participant feed the experience, right?
Oh, totally. And honestly, like that's like when I think about like right now, like with like a lot of the NFT stuff, it's like, we're tokenizing MP4s, like they're cool, they're interesting. But we're talking to some artists right now about creating work that is also like a little bit more participatory, that like really involves the user in some way that feels meaningful. And I think that's actually where digital art actually, I feel like can get really exciting because, there's a pretty, there's a pretty good like lineage of interactive art and like theatrical art and performance art that involves the viewer and like in some way that's meaningful. But very few of those that like actually then become something that's tangible and ownable. And I think like to me, like what I get really excited about is creating art in collaboration with the artist, and the artist really being the person that sort of creates a really meaningful framework for people to express themselves.
And I think that's the key, the framework piece of the puzzle, right? Because if you tell an artist, I'm a music guy, so if you go grab someone like Anderson .Paak and say, hey, come co-create music with a guy named Jimmy who just started playing bass last week from Arkansas, and he's gonna be like, well, I don't know about all that, but if there was a way that he could create a framework for Jimmy to riff on, knowing that he has creative authority on the framework that gets pushed out, and the remixes are what they are, or whatever the aggregate is. Yeah, I think blockchain and this technology in general, I think, will allow us to do really cool stuff like that.
Yep, 100%.
It's that bi-directional value exchange, but the value is now that kind of the experience. It's not actually some kind of monetary value. It's an experience value, which often can be worth more.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I turn this a bit? Because before we jumped on the call, you were talking about the change in culture since COVID, and I'm particularly interested in that. Before we do that, I've got a fact that I looked online before we came on here. If I don't use this fact, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. So I am going to use it.
We've cleared the path. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Go.
Okay, Jeremy. How many museums are there in the world?
Wow. Is that a question for me?
That's for you first, because Josh might know the answer. So I want you to give us an answer before Josh gives an answer.
Oh my gosh.
Josh doesn't need to give an answer.
Yeah. I've known this number at one point. Well, it's okay. Mark, you want to drop it? I'm gonna try.
I want Jeremy to take a guess.
Jeez, like what qualifies as a museum is
I
what
think you have to register it on some kind of database. It's like an admin thing. So it's probably not completely precise, but it's near enough to give you an idea.
7,251
in the world.
In the world.
Okay. Well. Josh, do you know the answer?
It's really hard. I mean, because the thing is, like, there's all these like house museums, which are like these like tiny little things. I think I remember looking up that. I remember at one point I tried to figure out if there was more people employed in museums or Google, and I think it was about the same.
Okay.
So I think it's going to be somewhere around like 20,000.
I know everyone in the chat's like vigorously punching in Google trying to get their. Yeah, put it in the chat, guys. What do you guys think?
55,000?
Too late. Yeah, 55,000. Which when I learned that, I was very surprised. I thought it would be a lot more than that. But then, if you think about all the great art as well, it's maybe housed in a few museums in 20 cities across the world, and it's surprisingly low to me.
Lisa's got it figured out.
Can I actually tell you where most of the art is housed?
Where? In the Guggenheim?
It's housed it's housed in giant storage facilities. So like when I worked at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, like a very, very small fraction of the art is on display. So they even have a center called the Loose Center where they have visible storage, where you go out there and you can like see all the stuff in the racks. But like literally there is a warehouse in Suitland, Maryland that is enormous, like enormous, where most of the stuff is. So like and actually like this is the thing that I think is like such a shame, which is that like most art, like and also like even great art is like not in circulation. It's not on display. It's like way like hidden away. And most people actually, I don't think have a really meaningful connection to visual culture. So I actually think like in some ways, like the NFT thing too, of like the tokenization of existing artworks or things that happen to be in storage so they can manifest in other places, like, and manifest physically, I think is also very powerful. Cause like, I just want people to have a really direct connection with great things.
Yeah, that's
95,000. Yeah, it's museum's such a weird term, honestly. It's like
the whole thing you mentioned about the storage of art, right? And how the majority of it is sitting in some kind of warehouse, or someone had bought, family foundation buys a bunch of art and tucks it away. And it's like I have that thing, I control that thing, but what is that thing doing if no one can see it, right? And therein lies the balance.
Oh yeah, and then people are just I'm gonna donate my collection to the to the Smithsonian or the National Gallery, or like any of these things, and like great, like maybe they'll put it on display for a month and they'll do like a show for you or something like that if there's a lot of really good stuff in there. But like usually they'll just accession and store it, which is like it's a shame because like I actually we were doing this project pre-COVID with the Walton Foundation, the owners of Walmart. They have crystal bridges, and they which is a amazing art collection in Arkansas, one of the best American art collections in the world. And then they were doing this thing called Art Bridges. And what Art Bridges was doing was literally just gonna be like a lending, almost like a lending program, where they were going to take the work that was in the Crystal Bridges collection and storage and just lend it out to all these smaller museums that might be, like, Mark, you're saying like, there's not a museum where you are, or like, and part of that is because it's very hard for them to get that work, so they were trying to solve that. I should actually reach back out to them. Everything got a little bit went sideways in COVID. But I think there's just a great opportunity, honestly, to just like get more like material culture out into the world and into some of these different communities.
Yeah, totally. I think the tech, I think maybe spatial computing, AR, it lends itself to having more of that stored artwork accessible, if not in the flesh, at least online, virtually in some way.
Yeah, or just print this stuff out. I mean, like printing is so, like, it's like, I drive around LA and I just see all of these like, giant printouts for like whatever, like the new TV show or his movie or whatever. Like printing technology is really cheap, and like, why not just print those things out at a high resolution, and if you own the NFT, it's worth something. If you don't, it's a poster, but I would love to see people feel more empowered to like have real art in their world, like even like you go to these like hotels, they don't have real art. Like no, everything is like, I think like the amount of visual culture that like, and great visual culture that exists versus the amount that's been disseminated into the world is like way out of whack.
Have you ever heard of a company called Loop, Loupe?
Yeah. They're doing like NFT screens.
Yeah, they basically set up art screens in hotels, and they're actually Atlanta based, I think.
Yeah.
Super interesting stuff that they're doing, and I think they're folding in Web3 components. So that's a way like good art is getting out into the world for people to experience.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to ask you, this is more of a technical question, I think. So we're bouncing between like the tech and the culture and the art and that sort of thing.
Sure.
There is a piece of technology that I'm really curious to understand. I wanted to know if you had ever had experience with it. Proto is like a hologram company. Have you heard of those guys before?
Yeah, I have.
What? Okay, if we're okay to steer clear from it if we need to.
No. I mean, so I actually, it's so funny because, okay, so for the MIT Museum, we did a 4-layered Pepper's Ghost, which is like essentially a hologram. It was volumetric. It was a volumetric video. And there's groups like Looking Glass Factory, which are definitely worth checking out, that do like what I would consider like legit volumetric holograms. And they're like, Proto is not a hologram. It's a clear OLED screen, a very, very large clear OLED screen in front of a light box. Okay, so like, it documents like a hologram, and it like almost like feels like a hologram, but like really what it is it's just a TV. So like, the reason I have like issue with this is because people are always being like, Blue Cadet, make us a hologram. I'm like, dude, okay, well, I can make you one that's like this big, or I can do this thing with this projectors and do this and Pepper's Ghost, or with like, and they're like, no, I saw it. Like, here's a link to this hologram. You can do it now. I'm like, oh, dude, no, you can't. Come on, man. I'm sorry. So like, I think he's kind of like screwing with the, I think he's actually backed off the language a little bit. I say he because I'm thinking David
company, yeah, or whatever, yeah.
But yeah, to me, I do think that there's something really interesting in telepresence. This idea of like having sort of one-to-one scale interactions. And I think there's something very powerful in that affordance. I'm not very impressed with the technology that they're rolling out, but I think I think the idea is actually pretty interesting. There's actually this thing called, I think it's a Google Light Chip, which is like their product, which is like a super high resolution screen, that they're doing a similar thing with telepresence, with like one-to-one scale, that I think is going to be very, very powerful. And then also like when I looked at the Apple Vision Pro demo, I think telepresence, like the idea of like replacing like this, the laptop as the primary form of like Zoom conversation is a huge use case for that platform, for that product, and I'm super bullish on that.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you think about all the technologies involved with the things you're building, right? There's the tech that actually that builds the experience, the code, the hardware, the network connection. And then you have like the user equipment and the limitations of that. Like
Oh yeah, yeah.
when you go all right, so you've gotten your story, right? You do your story visioning session with these guys, you figure out the story, and then you start to apply the tech. How does that start? Tell me, and this is probably a pretty complicated question, but how does the back and forth go when you're trying to bring the story to life, when they say, oh, but our users have no idea about technology. Oh, our network last mile to our place is 10 megabyte, or whatever. Like what does
Yeah.
a trade-off discussion like that look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, a big part of it is often like budget too. It's like, you're like, okay, well, we could do this thing on this thing. You're like, well, I was like, like this is actually very like what you're talking about is like hundreds of thousands of dollars of hardware. It's like I was like, we could 100, we totally do that, but like let's figure out what the dependencies are. But I would say, one of the things that we do is like at Blue Cadet is like we do a ton of prototyping, and we do a ton of prototyping on hardware. So, and like we will also have a lot of hardware in the studio that we're playing with that like that doesn't even necessarily have a project assigned to it yet. So, we've been playing a lot recently with like electronic ink displays, like the Kindle, but like super, super high resolution, like super, super low latency, and like at a much larger scales. And, it does have some application for some projects that we're doing, like some of the wayfinding projects that we're doing in particular. But it's the sort of thing that we're just like kicking the tires with it to see what it's capable of. So when a client comes to us, we like know what we can deploy. And then a lot of times what happens is like we talk about those ideation sprints. Sometimes we'll also do like a prototyping sprint on top of that, where it's like someone will come up with an idea and we'll just like kick the tire, like an AR idea. And we'll like, we'll kick the tires on Unity. We'll kick the tires on Eighth Wall. We'll kick the tires on some other, a native like web AR. Like we'll test these things out to see what's possible. And then you just push it as far as the technology will allow you. And, as far as the technology and budget will allow you, you push it. And then, you keep an eye out for when that technology line moves, and then you push it a little further.
Awesome. That sounds like a fun to be working, or not really working, is it? Kind of creating and exploring.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, look, honestly, like, museums are not necessarily the flushest group in the world. So you got to be also very pragmatic. But it is really fun. And it's like, and I think what particularly the fact that we have like really good content to work with often. And like sometimes this content could be like, we just did a bunch of stuff for Nike, and it was for like LeBron James Center, and like, those are science stories. Those are people stories. And like, it's not different than telling a museum story. So, like there's a lot of different people there's a lot of great stories that could use a little help in telling.
For sure. I'm still thinking about your idea of billboards away from TV adverts into pieces of art, and having art displayed in public places, maybe not on motorways because it's not the most secure. But I was thinking on that theme, like what can brands learn from museums? What can museums learn from brands? Is there a exchange of values there? Can they learn from each other? Is there a way to focus their attention? If you're a brand, what could you learn from MoMA?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, I would say MoMA is a brand. And like sometimes I have to actually like tell these institutions, I'm like, you are a brand, like MoMA's a, like that's a beautiful logo, and it has a brand promise. So it's like, I'm not gonna, I will actually answer your question. I think a lot of the brands, again, there's like a range in the same way there's a range in museums. I think like the best brands, like the brands that have like the most affinity, they tend to give a lot back to their consumers, to the buyers. So like, and they tend to be more almost about a vibe and a feeling than just a product. You take like a Nike, like Nike has a feeling, and part of that is like all the stuff that they're pushing into the world, the content that they're not trying to like, they're not like selling you all the time, they're just being awesome. And they're doing awesome things. And then from that, people love them. And so then want to consume into that, which I think is great, and like, or like a Google, Google puts a lot of money into arts and culture. They also give away things like maps and, and Gmail, and then also they just like do things that are cool and interesting, that I think, make people have a sort of an affinity for them. Whereas like, I think there are other brands like Facebook, which I felt, sometimes I feel like they feel extractive, like I feel like, Instagram is better, but like, I think where Facebook got in trouble was like that transfer of values, I think was like a bit out of whack, and it felt like they were taking more than they were giving. And I think, museums, I think they could be a little bit more. I think actually, in some ways, they could be more consumer oriented. I think sometimes they're just like, we're giving you great art, so F yourself, if you want more. But it's like, I think they can actually give more to their user, think more about their visitor, and like serve them more directly. And I think they'll benefit from that, And I think like, look, I mean, museums though, they also have super, super high integrity. And I think that's something that brands can definitely learn from, because like I think that a lot of brands like will jump on a trend, they'll jump on an artist, they'll jump on a thing, and that thing will blow up in their face because they did not check the box on integrity. I think, maybe we couldn't have seen how Kanye was going, but like I'm sure ASICS really, or like Adidas rather, probably has some regrets of jumping in so deeply into that.
Okay,
amazing. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. The time always flies on these things, and I think your work is great, Josh. I love how you're balancing the Blue Cadet and art world thing, where you're able to lean back into your own artistic perspective while running the agency. I think that's a really cool thing. What and Mark does a really good job of kind of summing these shows up in write-ups and stuff for later. What's exciting coming up for you in either of those worlds that you want to tell our audience about?
So I've actually been doing another thing, which is I'm doing Future Spaces at futurespaces.com, where I've been doing webinars. Actually, I have one this afternoon with an ex-Disney Imagineer who's now running experience in Airbnb, where I've just been like having lots of conversations with people from different kind of spaces in the experience design space. So we got someone from Meow Wolf coming up. We got someone from Museum of Ice Cream. We've got someone from NASA JPL. Someone one of my friends who's a photographer who's working in AI. Just like trying to think about like what are the what are the cool juxtapositions you can have in these sort of different spaces and like what's possible. I also honestly, I put a lot of content on LinkedIn. Like that's like kind of where I spend most of my social energy. But usually all those things is me just like trolling the Blue Cadet or Art World Slack channel and just repackaging it for other people. So that's, pay attention there. If you want to see some of the stuff we're playing with.
Amazing. That's awesome. Mark. Closing thoughts on your side?
Yeah, so I took a lot of questions because Blue Cadet has this insights blog page, which has some really cool, some really good articles on it. And one of the questions I didn't get to ask was one of the articles was entitled, and I think this is quite pertinent for our other conversations about virtual worlds and the metaverse. Virtual events are experiences. Why aren't they designed that way? And that I wanted to say, why aren't they designed that way? But I won't end with that. I'll end with a question that's quite easy to answer. I think we just spoke before the call. We've both got young, or in Jeremy's case, not so young anymore, kids. Are your children, and you said your daughter is a bit of an artist, are they using any kind of emerging tech to create art already? And so my daughter, for example, is 7. What might be a good tool to kind of introduce her to this world of art meets tech? Because obviously kids love drawing, so it'd be nice to bring something into it.
So actually, the thing that I actually do a lot with my kids is we do Mid-Journey together, but then we actually do Mid-Journey so that we can have things that we draw from. So it's like, when I was a kid, like I did lots of drawing. So I would like copy comic books, but then I would also like go into like National Geographic and copy, like use that. And there was just like so much there was like a lack of visual content to like be able to like actually draw against. And there's like so much right now. So I think that stuff's super, super exciting because I think there's something really fun about drawing, like that I think that's just an important set of neurons that to develop. So we use Mid-Journey all the time to do that. And then, like I just take my kids with me to all this stuff. So like they've been to Meow Wolf, we went to, we were actually at Space Houston a few weeks ago, and like I know those guys in the museum circuit, so I get tours and stuff like that. But like just like bringing kids along to these things, I even take them along to some of my meetings. Like we were meeting with the Jim Henson Creature Factory, so like I was just like, can I just bring my kids? Like bring my wife.
That's a super dad moment.
Yeah,
Like
wow. Why not?
Yep. No,
Awesome,
that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, in the interest of time, Josh, we really appreciate you being here. I encourage everyone to check out Blue Cadet, Art World, and Future Spaces. Sounds like there's some great content coming out of there. We want to definitely say another big thank you and shout out to Ripple, Dixie Ray, and the team over there. I would definitely check those guys out. Mark will be posting some links. And dare I say, if Ripple was around when Josh was a freelancer, his Ripple handle would have been Blue Cadet.
Probably, yes.
But who knows? But as far as we go, guys, we're here every Thursday. The time tends to vary a little bit. Stay in touch on that. thinkingonpaper.xyz. You can see all of these previous episodes. We're on Spotify as well. And Mark will hopefully be landed back in his house. I'll believe it when I see it.
Yes.
Next week.
I will. If I can drag myself away from the pool.
Amazing. Well, hey, thanks guys. Guys out there, appreciate you joining, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You got it.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.